The boy was barefoot on the slope, struggling with a bundle of firewood too heavy for his arms. He stood still when he saw the man watching him from the ridge, didn't flinch, didn't run, though any other child would have taken off screaming. The stranger was massive, broad as a barn door, a dark brown cowboy hat pulled low over weathered eyes. His vest hung loose over a muscled chest, and his arms, sun-browned and tattooed, were streaked with dust. His boots were worn but sound, and his silence, it was heavy. Not angry, not cruel, just steady. The boy shifted the bundle in his arms and called up in a voice that trembled but didn't break. "If I help you carry the firewood, will you make the bad men leave?" That stopped the wind. Caden Holt, once known by names no longer spoken aloud, stared down at the boy for a long moment. The pine trees stood silent around him, as if even nature waited for his reply. His horse snorted softly, shifting its weight on the rock-strewn path. The boy's name, he would learn, was Eli, 10 years old, barefoot, and too thin for his frame. But his back was straight and his jaw was set, like he'd learned too early how to hold in tears. Caden wasn't used to questions like that. Not anymore. Not since he'd left the wars behind, not since the grave markers in Santa Rosa. "You got a name, kid?" Caden asked finally, his voice low and even. "Eli," the boy said. "My mama calls me that. My real name's longer, but she says Eli fits better now that it's just the two of us." "And the bad men? They come on horses. 4 of them. One has a silver spur that jingles, and another's missing half an ear. They want our chickens, our eggs. Say the land ain't ours. They push my mama, spit near her boots. Said next time they'd take more." Caden's eyes narrowed. The boy added, more quietly now, "Mama says not to speak of it. But I saw her crying when she thought I was asleep. She don't cry much." Caden nodded once, then nudged his horse forward. "Where's your home?" "Down this ridge." "Not far. I can carry half the bundle if you carry the other." Without a word, Caden dismounted, took the firewood from Eli's thin arms, and started down the path. The boy hurried to match his stride, his small legs scuffing through the dry dust. The land sloped into a basin of scattered oaks and brittle grass. A tired-looking cabin sat beneath the trees, its roof patchy, one shutter dangling. A small corral held 3 chickens and a goat that looked more bone than beast. There was no smoke from the chimney. "She's inside," Eli said, brushing dust from his face. "She don't know I went far." Caden didn't reply. He dropped the firewood near the door and waited. The door creaked open. She was younger than he'd expected. Late 20s maybe, 30 at most. Her long dark hair was braided simply down her back, and the blue cotton dress she wore had been patched at the shoulders and hem. Her skin bore the sun's kiss, and something older, something rooted in Yaqui blood and Mexican sorrow. Her hands were strong, but there was a tremor in them as she stepped onto the porch. "Eli," she said, the name edged with worry. "Where did you go?" "I found help," Eli said proudly. "He's strong, Mama. And he don't talk much. That means he's good." She looked at Caden, wary, measuring. "You Apache?" she asked. "No, not full," he replied. "Holt. Caden Holt. You're far from any town." "I like it that way." She studied him another moment before nodding toward the shade of the porch. "I made coffee this morning." Still warm, maybe. He followed her inside, boots soft on the worn floorboards. The cabin was neat, poor, but dignified. She handed him a chipped enamel cup. The brew was bitter and thin, but he drank it with a nod of thanks. "I'm Rosa," she said. "My boy speaks too much sometimes. But he doesn't lie. I can tell." She glanced toward the window. "They'll be back." Caden said nothing. "They come every few days. Used to just demand eggs and bread. Now they touch my hair. Say things in front of Eli. Talk like they're owed something, because my papa left me this land and because I ain't fully white. Who's behind it? My half-brother, she said. Don Mateo. Thinks this land should have been his when our father died, but papa left it to me, signed and witnessed proper. Mateo doesn't care. He runs San Gerardo now, has the judge in his pocket. His men act like kings. Caden set down the cup. They got names. The leader's Vega. Big, loud, thinks cruelty is charm. There's a thin one with yellow teeth and a laugh like a donkey. I don't know the others. Eli leaned into Caden's side, uninvited but natural. I saw him throw a man once, he said, back in Dusty Rock. A gambler called him a redskin. He didn't say a word, just threw him clear across a table, broke 4 chairs. You been following me? Caden asked, eyes narrowing. Sometimes, Eli said, from a distance. Rosa pressed her fingers to her mouth, embarrassed. He likes to wander. Always comes home, but Caden stood. I'll camp under the oaks. You'd stay? She asked, voice lower now. Why? Caden didn't answer. He walked out into the glare of afternoon light. His horse lifted its head as he approached, but he didn't mount. Instead, he took his rifle from the saddlebag and checked the chamber. Then he looked back at the cabin, at the boy still standing in the doorway, and at the woman now watching him with quiet uncertainty. He nodded once. That was all. By dusk, he had a tarp stretched between 2 trees and a cookpot warming over a smokeless fire. Eli came with a gourd of water and a million questions. Caden answered maybe 3 of them. Later, the moon was rising when Caden heard it. Hoofbeats, soft, practiced, 4 horses. Coming from the east. They didn't stop at the gate. From his place in the shadows, Caden watched them dismount. Vega led, wide-shouldered, his silver spurs glinting in the moonlight. The thin man with yellow teeth spat tobacco and sniffed the air like a dog. Evenin', Rosa, Vega called, knocking his boot against the doorframe. Rosa stepped out, lantern in hand. Her shoulders were back, her voice calm. You're early. Don Mateo don't like waiting. We have little to give. You've got eggs, and maybe a little more if you stop playing proud. Caden's hand hovered near his knife, but he didn't move yet. The thin man stepped closer to Rosa, reached for her braid. Then Eli's voice rang out sharp and high. Don't touch my mama. The boy had stepped outside, a broomstick clutched like a rifle. His voice shook, but his feet didn't move. Vega laughed. That's cute. And then Caden stepped out from the dark. He didn't raise his voice, didn't run. He just walked forward with a steady gait that made all 4 men pause. I wouldn't, he said. Vega turned. And who the hell are you? Someone who don't like bullies. One of the men started to draw. Caden didn't wait. His knife flashed, burying itself in the wooden beam next to Vega's head. I was aiming for your ear, Caden said flatly. Missed. Silence. Heavy. Vega sneered. This ain't your business, stranger. Caden's voice didn't change. It is now. Vega looked at Rosa, then at Eli, then back at the knife quivering in the beam. He spat on the ground. Don Mateo's gonna hear about this. I hope he does, Caden replied. Be easier that way. They left in a flurry of hooves and cursing, the dust not yet settled when Caden turned toward Rosa. She hadn't moved. Her hand clutched Eli's shoulder, her face unreadable, but her voice, when it came, was steady. They'll come back. Caden looked down. Her sleeve had slipped, revealing bruises along her wrist. Old, but not faded. He stared at the dark marks for a long moment, then said quietly, like a promise forged in iron, They'll be back, and this time I'll be waiting. Caden Holt had always preferred the company of silence. The oaks behind Rosa's cabin offered just enough shade, and just enough distance. He pitched camp where the earth sloped down and the wind carried the smell of mesquite and pine. He didn't build a fire, didn't hammer a stake. His presence was there, but quiet, like a shadow stitched into the land itself. By dawn, the boy came. Eli crept toward the camp, carrying a tin cup in both hands, careful not to spill the water inside. Caden saw him coming, but pretended not to until the boy stood just near enough. "Morning," Eli said, trying to sound casual. "Mama says you don't have to sleep out here. Says there's space in the loft." Caden took the cup without answering. Drank, nodded once. Eli scratched at his arm. "She also says you won't stay long. Says men like you don't stay anywhere." Caden poured the last of the water onto the dust, then looked at the boy. "Men like me? You look like a man who's already left too many places," Eli said. The words hung there, heavy. Caden didn't smile, but something in his eyes shifted. "Bring rope. I'll show you something." They spent the morning with a weathered length of hemp rope and a crooked fence post behind the cabin. Caden's hands moved with slow certainty as he showed the boy how to loop, tighten, release. Not just knots, but knots that held when they needed to and let go when they had to. The kind you trusted with livestock or lives. Eli watched closely, copying each motion. His fingers were small but sure. "You learn fast," Caden said. "I like learning," Eli answered. "Most folks don't teach much. Mama does when she has time. Mostly just how to stay quiet and how to know when not to." Caden tied the last knot tight, then tossed the rope to the boy. "Try that one with your eyes closed." Eli stared at him. "You serious?" Caden just nodded. By midday, they moved down to the stream. Caden showed him where deer had passed in the night, the way the mud curved inward under the hoof, the slight scratch of a twig pushed sideways. He pointed to a droplet of blood on a rock, no bigger than a fly's wing. "Coyote," he said. Eli leaned in, squinting. "You can tell from that? Enough years alone, you learn to read what the earth says." Eli walked beside him, no longer shy. "Why were you alone?" Caden didn't answer. They walked farther. The silence returned, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was the kind that settled around people who didn't need to fill space with words. That evening, Rosa stood at the edge of the porch, arms folded, watching them come back. Caden carried a rabbit, slung low in one hand. Eli had a grin so wide it seemed to light the dirt path. "You taught him to track?" Rosa asked, eyes narrowed. "He figured it himself," Caden said. "I just slowed him down long enough to notice." She gave a small nod. Her gaze lingered on Eli, his shirt soaked with sweat, dirt on his cheeks, happiness in his walk. Then she looked back at Caden, softer now. "He's never had anyone stay." "Not really. His Uncle Mateo's man used to drop by, say a few words, then disappear." Eli got used to not depending on anyone. Caden met her eyes. "People don't need much to grow," he said. "Just need to know they're not invisible." She didn't reply, but her hand reached out and rested briefly on her son's back. Later, when the boy was inside and Caden stood near the corral adjusting the gate hinges, Rosa came out again, this time with a blanket over her shoulders. The air had cooled, the wind carrying a faint chill down from the mountains. "My father used to say only fools look at land like it's just dirt," she said. "Said land remembers things. Pain, too. I think that's why Mateo wants mine so bad. Not for the dirt, for the power. Mateo's a coward with money," Caden replied. "And cowards with money are dangerous." "Eli says you lost someone." Caden didn't flinch. "A wife. A daughter." "Winter fever," Rosa looked down. "I'm sorry." He shrugged. "Was a long time ago, but sometimes it feels like yesterday. I still dream of my father," she said softly. even though he turned his back on me at the end. Sometimes I hate him for it. Sometimes I miss him so much I can't breathe. Caden didn't offer comfort, just listened. She turned to him after a moment. Eli asked me if you'd be here tomorrow. I told him I don't know. Caden met her gaze. You want me gone? No, she said. I want you to mean it if you stay. Caden nodded, slow and deliberate. The next morning broke with a sky the color of tarnished silver and the smell of dust thick on the breeze. Caden was repairing the front gate when he heard the hoofbeats again. No surprise this time, just confirmation. 4 riders, same men, same horses. They didn't dismount right away. Vega sat tall in the saddle, chewing a toothpick, eyes hidden beneath the brim of his hat. We come for what's owed, he said. Rosa stepped onto the porch, her voice steady. There's nothing for you here. The thin one with yellow teeth grinned. That ain't what Mateo says. Caden walked forward then, slow and easy, wiping his hands on a rag. You want eggs? He asked. Got 3 left. Chickens are sickly. Want bread? You'll need to grind it yourself, Vega chuckled. And what if we want more than that? Caden stopped 2 paces from Vega's horse. You'd best decide now, he said quietly. If you're here to take, then take. But understand, this time you don't ride away clean. Vega's smile wavered. The man with the scarred neck shifted in his saddle. The thin one swallowed hard. You threatening us, stranger? No, Caden said. I'm promising you. Silence. Then Vega pulled on his reins. Come on, he barked. Ain't worth the blood. Not today. They turned as one, galloping off in a spray of dirt. Eli had watched the whole thing from behind the door. He stepped out now, barefoot, eyes wide. They just left? Caden turned, expression unreadable. For now. Rosa stepped beside her son, a hand on his shoulder. Her fingers trembled. Caden noticed. She didn't try to hide it. He looked at the bruises on her wrist again, already yellowing around the edges. They'll be back, he said. Then he looked Rosa in the eye. But so will I. The floor creaked beneath Caden's boot as he stepped into the kitchen. The smell of coffee lingered in the rafters, but the pot was cold now, the sun already starting its slide westward. Rosa was in the garden with her sleeves rolled up and dirt on her knees, pulling weeds as though they'd personally insulted her. Eli tugged at Caden's vest, motioning him to follow with the kind of secretive urgency only children could summon. She doesn't like people knowing, Eli whispered, but you should see it. You need to. He led Caden through the cabin like a guide through sacred ground, careful not to knock the shelf of jars, careful to step over the loose board near the stove. He paused by the hearth, then dropped to his knees and peeled back the rag rug, revealing a knot in the floor that had been rubbed smooth. Eli reached into the corner and pulled out a thin iron rod. With practiced ease, he slid it between 2 floorboards and pried one up. The hollow beneath smelled of old wood and forgotten time. Inside, wrapped in a faded quilt scrap, were papers, dozens of them, yellowed by years and edged in dust. Eli lifted them gently, as if lifting bones. She doesn't know I know where they are, he said, but I've seen her reading them when she thinks I'm asleep. Sometimes she cries. Caden took the bundle and carried it to the table. The papers were stiff, some of them inked in a script so fine it had begun to fade. There were land deeds, some in Spanish, others in English. Several had government seals and signatures. One was a map, hand-drawn but detailed, with markers showing boundary lines and rivers. But it was the letters that stopped him cold, written in a firmer, uglier hand, signed M.H. Mateo Herrera. The first spoke of persuading local officials. The second referred to shifting borders and reassigning holdings. The third was more blunt. The judge will look the other way for 5 head of cattle and 1 hunting rifle, it read. We don't need Rosa's signature. Her kind doesn't hold up in court anyhow. Caden's jaw tightened. Behind him, Rosa's voice broke the silence. You went through my floor. He didn't turn. Your boy led me. She stepped in slowly, wiping her hands on her apron, her face a complicated storm. He shouldn't have, she said, but there was no bite in her tone. Caden turned, holding the letter up. This is your brother. She hesitated, then nodded. My half-brother. Mateo was born to my father's first wife. Pure Castilian, pale skin, straight hair, proper manners. My mother was Yaqui. She worked the ranch kitchen until my father brought her into his bed. I was the result. She pulled out a chair and sat, as if the weight of truth was heavier now that someone else had seen it. My father loved us both. But Mateo, he hated sharing. When Papa died, the will named me rightful owner of this land. Mateo tore it from the lawyer's hands, claimed it was forged, said no whore's daughter could inherit a Spanish ranch. Caden said nothing. I was 17, she went on, and pregnant. I wouldn't tell him who the father was, because, truthfully, I didn't know if the boy had left or died, or simply couldn't bear the shame. Mateo ran me off that night, said if I stayed, he'd burn the house around me. So I left. Built this place with help from the Herrera ranch hands, who had hearts bigger than their paychecks. Caden folded the letter, placed it on top of the others. You kept the proof. She gave a small smile, bitter at the edges. I kept my father's word. Doesn't mean it ever held up in court. Mateo bought off every judge from here to Tucson. What I have wouldn't matter unless someone with power looked hard enough. He stared at her. They will. No one's going to care, Caden, she said, rising, her hands clenched. Not about a half-breed woman with no husband and a bastard child. Mateo's got lawyers, guns, respect. All I've got is a boy too brave for his own good and a plot of land that's barely held together. Caden walked over to the table and laid the letters back down, gently, like they were sleeping animals. My father was white, he said. Irish, from back east. My mother was Apache. She didn't get to name me. The priest at the fort did. Said my real name sounded like a growl. He met her eyes. When soldiers burned our village, they said it was to protect settlers. My ma died in a fever that winter, trying to keep me warm in a cave with snow falling through the roof. Nobody cared then, either. But it doesn't mean the truth wasn't real. Rosa looked at him long and quiet. Something shifted in her face, a flicker of pain becoming something like trust. I didn't ask for your help, she said. No, he replied. You asked for water. Your boy asked for help. He picked up the bundle, tucked it beneath his arm. These papers matter, but not hidden under your feet. When it's time, you show them, and when will that be? When people are watching, he said, and the right man is listening. She started to reply, but a sound outside cut her short. Horse hooves, 4 of them. They didn't knock this time. Vega's voice carried through the cabin wall like gravel sliding over steel. Rosie, he called, mocking. We got tired of waiting. Thought we'd come see how the chickens are doing. Maybe check the hen house. Maybe check what's under your dress. Eli's eyes widened. He backed away from the window, fists clenched. Rosa reached for the rifle by the door. Caden didn't. He stepped to the window, lifted the corner of the curtain, and watched the men fan out, hands resting casually on holstered guns. One of them spit tobacco into Rosa's vegetable bed. Caden turned to Rosa. You armed? 1 rifle, 1 bullet. He nodded. That's all I'll need. He stepped outside into the evening light, tall and quiet as always. The sun lit his shoulders, casting long shadows that made him look even larger. Vega smirked. Well, if it ain't the Indian cowboy. Come to play sheriff now. Caden walked forward until there were only 10 paces between them. Then 5. Then 3. "You said you'd be back," Caden said. Vega tilted his head. "And you said you'd stop us." "I said I'd be here. I didn't say what I'd do." Caden didn't draw, but the silence he held between them was sharp enough to cut a throat. Vega's eyes narrowed. "You think standing there looking scary's gonna change anything?" Caden took one step closer. "No," he said, "but next time I won't be standing." The wind shifted. The trees behind the house rustled like old spirits murmuring. Vega stared at him, jaw clenched, fingers twitching. Then he spat, hard and mean, and turned his horse. "Let's go." The others hesitated, then followed. As their hoofbeats faded, Caden stood still, not turning until they were out of sight. Inside, Rosa had stepped to the door, the rifle lowered but not forgotten. "You think they'll stop?" she asked. "No." She waited. Then what good is all this? Caden glanced back toward the table, the bundle of yellowed pages still spread beneath the window. "Truth is heavier than a bullet," he said softly, "and just as dangerous when aimed right." Eli had never heard a sound like that come from his mother. He'd just finished tying off the coop gate, proud of how the new rope knots held fast the way Caden had shown him. The morning was dry, sun sharp on the ridge, a wind coming down from the canyon carrying the scent of dust and chicken feed. The day had begun like any other, until that sound half-gasp, half-cry cut through the stillness. He turned so fast he tripped over his own bare foot, scrambled to his feet, and ran. Rosa lay on the ground beside the well. Her hand was stretched out like she'd been trying to reach the bucket crank, but her eyes were open and unfocused, lips moving in a whisper that made no sense. "Mama?" Eli dropped beside her, pressing his hands to her cheeks, then her neck. Her skin burned under his fingers. "Mama?" She didn't answer. "Mama, please!" "Wake up!" His breath came in ragged bursts. He didn't know what to do. He ran to the porch, banged the pot on the railing like she did when calling in the chickens. Caden appeared from the edge of the trees before the last clang faded. "She's not waking up," Eli said, pointing with both arms like the panic was too big to hold. "She's talking, but her words don't make sense." Caden knelt beside Rosa, touched her forehead, then pulled the cork from his canteen and pressed it gently to her lips. She coughed, sputtered, then went still again. "What happened?" he asked. "She got water from the well." She drank. Then she said her stomach felt wrong. That was just after breakfast. Caden's eyes went to the well, then back to Rosa. "Stay with her," he said, "no matter what happens." "You stay." He turned, whistled low to his horse, and rode hard toward the river trail. The old healer lived past the cottonwoods, near a bend in the creek where the water smelled of iron and the birds always flew low. Her name was Tamasa, and she had bones older than most trees. People said she spoke with the spirits and could summon death from a wound or life from the edge of it. Caden didn't believe in stories, but he did believe in her hands. He found her kneeling by her herb garden, picking yarrow with fingers so thin they looked like brittle twigs. Her back was curved from age, her long braid as white as river foam. When she looked up, her eyes were sharp as obsidian. "I thought you were a ghost," she said. "I'm not." Rosa's dying Tamasa straightened with effort, reaching for her staff. "Then what are you waiting for, Caden Holt?" Back at the cabin, Eli was sitting on the floor next to Rosa, his small hand resting on hers. He didn't look up when Caden returned, but when he saw the old woman beside him, his eyes filled with something between fear and hope. Tamasa dropped to her knees beside Rosa, unwrapping bundles from her satchel with swift, practiced movements. Charcoal, elderberry, dried sage, and something Caden didn't recognize. "Fever's high," she muttered. "Sweat smells wrong." She's been poisoned, Eli's breath caught. Poisoned? Bitter herb, Tomasa confirmed. Not enough to kill. Just enough to weaken. To send a message, Caden's jaw clenched. Who'd use it? Someone who wants her sick, but not dead. Someone who wants her helpless. Tomasa crushed the herbs together, steeping them in hot water over Rosa's stove. The scent was sharp, biting, and filled the room like a warning. She tilted Rosa's head and forced a mouthful of the black brew between her lips. Come back now, girl, she whispered. We're not done with you. Hours passed. Caden didn't move from the corner. Eli slept in a chair, arms crossed over his knees, his head nodding against his own shoulder. Outside, the chickens clucked uneasily, and the shadows lengthened across the porch. Tomasa finally sighed and wiped Rosa's forehead with a cloth soaked in rainwater. She'll live, she said. She'll be weak for days, but she'll come back. Caden exhaled slowly. Thank you. Tomasa glanced at him, eyes unreadable. You're different, she said. Quieter than you used to be. But not softer. He didn't answer. Instead, he stepped out onto the porch and crouched near the well. The ground there was undisturbed, but something near the chicken coop caught his eye. Boot prints, large, deep at the heels, fresh, too fresh. He followed the trail around the side of the coop to the place where the water basin sat under a tin awning. The edge of the basin had a dark residue, a smear of something bitter, earthy, unnatural. He picked up a handful of soil nearby and sniffed it. Bitter root. He walked back to the house, the soil still clutched in his hand. Tomasa met him at the door. You find what you needed? He nodded. They're watching us. They always were, she said. Inside, Rosa stirred for the first time, her lips parting with a broken murmur. Caden knelt beside her and placed the back of his hand to her cheek. Rest, he said. Tomasa pulled something from beneath her shawl, a folded piece of thick parchment, edges frayed, the ink faded but legible. A map. I was keeping this, she said. Her grandfather gave it to me before he died. Told me to guard it until someone was ready to fight for what it proved. Caden unfolded the map on the table. It showed the original land boundaries of the Herrera family estate, marked by landmarks now buried under cabins, fences, and Mateo's forged lines. This land, Tomasa said, tapping the old boundary, was never his. Mateo's been selling government land, stealing from Rosa, from the people. The records your boy found confirm it. This map seals it. Caden stared at it for a long time. Why not bring it out before? Tomasa's mouth twisted. Because papers don't stop bullets, Holt. But now you're here. Maybe things have changed. Night fell. Caden sat outside, sharpening his knife in the dark. The wind picked up again, cool and constant, rustling the leaves like whispers from somewhere long ago. Inside, Rosa slept, her breathing slow but steady. Eli had curled up on a pile of quilts beside the fire. Tomasa slept in the chair, arms crossed, like a bird ready to fly at the first crack of danger. Caden stared into the dark, thinking about his daughter, about the day she died, about how he held her small body in his arms, wrapped in a blanket too thin for the cold, about how he couldn't save her, no matter how many men he'd fought, before or since. He looked back at the house. The light from the lantern flickered through the window. He could still leave, pack up, ride north, cross the desert and vanish again into the silence, but he wouldn't. He stood, rolled his shoulders, and stepped back inside. Rosa lay sleeping, her brow still damp, her hand resting on her chest. He looked down at her and spoke low, so only the fire could hear him. We don't run. We stand. The wheels of Tomasa's wagon groaned over the dry, packed road, creaking like bones in the cold. Caden walked alongside, his hand steady on the horse's halter as they passed the outer fields of San Gerardo. The desert gave way to signs of human control, rows of maize, clotheslines sagging between crooked houses, and children watching from behind cracked shutters. Tomasa sat straight in the cart, her old shawl drawn tight around her shoulders, her face set like stone. The map and letters were bundled tight in her satchel, tied with a strip of deer hide. She hadn't said much since leaving the cabin. She didn't need to. Caden knew what they were walking into. San Gerardo had changed since he'd passed through 2 years earlier. The people looked harder now, shoulders hunched, eyes darting. The color had drained from the place. Even the mission bell sounded thinner. The church stood whitewashed and weary, its adobe cracked from too many summers and not enough repairs. Caden knocked once on the back door, then stepped aside. Father Alonso answered, robes dusted with ash from the hearth, eyes rimmed with fatigue. He was small, wiry, his silver hair tied back with a leather cord, hands calloused from work. Few priests still did themselves. "Tomasa," he said, a touch of surprise in his voice. "I thought you were done with men in collars." "God listens," she said, brushing past him, "even when his servants forget how." Inside, the church smelled of smoke and lavender. Light filtered through narrow stained windows, painting streaks of red and gold across the flagstone floor. Tomasa wasted no time. She unrolled the map on the priest's table and set the letters down beside it. "I came because you baptized Rosa when she was small, because you knew her father, and because you still wear that cross like it means something." Father Alonso read in silence, lips tightening as the pieces came together. Halfway through Mateo's second letter, his hand trembled. "These are serious accusations," he said at last. "Land theft, bribery, fraud against the territorial government. This could tear San Gerardo apart." "Better to tear it than to let it rot," Caden said, voice low. The priest looked at him for a long moment. "You're the one who stood against Vega last week." "I don't stand for anyone," Caden said, "but I don't kneel to bullies." Alonso picked up the map, running his finger along the edge of the boundary line. "The feast day is this Sunday. Don Mateo will be there, smiling in the front pew, blessing the bread with hands that have stolen half the valley." "That's why we came," Tomasa said. "The whole town will be watching. Some from the capital, too. You speak then, and you speak truth. These people may not listen to me, but they'll listen to you." The priest set down the map. "Do you understand what you're asking me to do?" Caden nodded. "We're not asking you to pick a side, just to choose right over wrong." Father Alonso stared at the crucifix above the altar. When he spoke again, his voice was quieter. "God forgive me for waiting this long." Back at the cabin, the rain had started. Eli sat near the fire, flipping the pages of a book with pictures of animals and tracks. Rosa rested on the bed, her color better, but her strength still slow to return. She looked toward the window as thunder cracked in the distance. "They've been gone too long," she murmured. "They'll be back before dark," Eli said. But Rosa's hand fidgeted at her side. She didn't believe it. In the corner, the fire hissed. The sound of the rain on the roof grew harder. The goats bleated restlessly. Miles away, in a building that used to be a schoolhouse and now served as Don Mateo's office, 6 men stood around a table, dripping with water and hate. Mateo circled them slowly, gloved hands behind his back. "They've stirred the old woman," he said. "They're planning something, maybe even have proof. But I'll be damned before I let that half-breed girl take what belongs to my name." The men shifted, eyes hard, mouths tight. One of them, a wiry man with a scar down his neck, spit into a can. "What do you want done?" Mateo turned toward the rain-streaked window. "I want that cabin gone, burned to the earth. I want the Apache dead." The old woman silenced, and the boy, "Let the flames decide his fate." "You want it clean?" "No," Mateo said. I want it final." The man with the scar gave a half smile. "Tonight?" "Tonight." Back at the cabin, Caden and Tomasa returned just after dusk. Caden's shoulders were soaked through, the brim of his hat heavy with water. Rosa met him at the door with a look that said more than her words ever could. Did he agree? Caden nodded once. Sunday. Tomasa stepped past them both, toward the hearth. She knelt beside Rosa, placed a hand on her chest like a mother checking a fever. "You'll be strong enough by then," she said, "whether you want to be or not." Rosa didn't argue. The rain came harder. The wind changed. Caden stood at the window, his hand resting on the rifle near the door. He didn't like the stillness. Animals knew before people did. And the goats were quiet now. Too quiet. He moved to the porch and scanned the darkness. The storm covered most sounds, but even through the wind and rain he heard it. Hooves, 6 sets. Rosa came up behind him, eyes wide. Caden didn't turn. "Get the boy. Hide in the root cellar, stay quiet until I come for you." Rosa hesitated. "What about you?" "I'm not the one they're after." Eli's voice called out from inside. "Mama?" "Who's coming?" Rosa grabbed his hand and pulled him toward the cellar door. Caden stepped off the porch, into the storm, the rifle cold in his hands. The men came into view just as the lightning struck, casting their faces in blue-white fire. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. Caden raised his weapon and leveled his breath. The rain was still falling, but fire was coming. The wind howled like something feral, ripping through the oaks as if trying to tear them from the earth. Rain came down in sheets, washing over the land in sweeping waves. The fire in Caden's chest burned hotter than the storm could ever cool. 6 riders approached through the dark, their outlines blurred by water and smoke. One of them hurled a bottle lit at the mouth. It arced like a comet and shattered against the side of the cabin, flames catching fast on the corner post, licking up toward the roof. Inside, Eli cried out, muffled beneath the floorboards where Rosa had hidden him. Tomasa stayed behind with the boy, clutching a knife as old as her bones. Caden didn't wait for the next torch. He moved. A flash of lightning lit the yard as he dashed out from behind the barn, soaked to the bone but silent as shadow. The first man didn't even see him, just grunted in surprise before Caden's elbow crushed his windpipe and sent him toppling into the mud. The second man swung wide with a rifle butt, catching Caden across the ribs. Pain shot through him like fire. He gritted his teeth, dropped low, and drove his blade up through the man's side, feeling the tremble as it pierced flesh and cracked bone. The man fell screaming into the rain, clutching his gut. The third came at him fast, pistol raised, eyes wild. Caden ducked behind the broken cart, grabbed a pitchfork, and swung the wooden handle across the attacker's knees. The man stumbled. Caden surged forward and drove the haft into his throat. 3 down. But then came the 4th. A bullet ripped through the night and found Caden's left arm. The force of it spun him sideways, knocking him into the fence. He landed hard, blood mixing with rainwater, pain burning white-hot through muscle and nerve. He looked up through the haze just in time to see a figure dismounting and walking toward the cabin, rifle in hand. Eli. The man was headed straight for the root cellar door. Caden growled deep in his throat and pushed himself upright. His wounded arm hung useless at his side, but his legs still held. He stumbled forward, picked up the fallen blade, and hurled it. The knife spun end over end and buried itself in the man's shoulder. The rifle dropped. The man screamed. Caden lunged before he could recover, driving his good shoulder into the man's chest and slamming him into the wall of the cabin. A second shot rang out. For a moment, Caden thought it was his end. But it was Rosa. She stood in the doorway, hair soaked and dress torn, the old rifle from her father's trunk still smoking in her hands. The 5th man dropped where he stood. Only one remained, already retreating, spooked by the blood, the storm, the fury. Caden didn't chase him. His vision blurred. He fell to his knees in the mud. Rosa was there in seconds. "Caden," she cried, grabbing him under the good arm, dragging him toward the porch. "I'm fine," he lied through gritted teeth. "You're not fine," she snapped, voice sharp with fear. "You're bleeding out." He didn't argue. She pulled him into the cabin where Tomasa had already cleared the table. Eli crawled out from beneath the trap door, eyes wide and wet, and ran to Caden's side. "You're hurt bad," he whispered. Caden looked at the boy and offered a half smile. "Not as bad as they are." Tomasa ripped open his shirt sleeve with a knife, exposing the angry wound. Blood pulsed from it, dark and hot. Rosa took one look and turned pale, but she didn't flinch. She pressed a clean cloth to the hole and leaned hard. He groaned, and the sound was more animal than man. "You're not dying," Rosa said, her voice trembling. "You're not." Tomasa poured whiskey into the wound, and Caden nearly passed out. "Talk to me," Rosa whispered, her hands slick with his blood. "Talk, damn you." Caden forced himself to focus on her face. "They won't stop," he said, voice hoarse, lips dry. She shook her head. "Then we run. We take Eli and disappear. Find somewhere Mateo can't reach." He looked at her, fierce and steady. "We don't run," he said, the same words he'd whispered 2 nights before. "We finish this Sunday." Rosa's breath caught. Eli stepped closer and laid his hand gently on Caden's good arm. "We'll be ready," the boy said. "All of us." Outside, the fire on the cabin wall had died out in the rain, but something deeper had started to burn. The plaza of San Gerardo hadn't seen that many people in years. By mid-morning, wagons lined the edge of town like a procession of battered saints, their wheels sunk in mud from the recent rains. Men in Sunday shirts leaned against fence posts, chewing tobacco, squinting against the sun. Women in shawls and long skirts moved in packs, carrying pots of beans, stacks of tortillas, and bundles of flowers. Children chased one another between booths of sugar candy and fried bread, laughter high and wild like birds released from cages. Caden stood near the back of the crowd, leaning against the trunk of a sun-scorched sycamore. His arm was bandaged tight beneath his shirt, the pain still pulsing beneath the linen. But he didn't wince. He just watched. Rosa stood further ahead, beside Tomasa. Eli perched on a wagon wheel behind them, legs swinging. His face held the same nervous fire Caden had seen on young warriors before their first real fight. No one called this a battle, but they all knew it was. Father Alonso stepped onto the steps of the mission church just after noon, dressed in white robes that fluttered slightly in the dry breeze. The crowd hushed. The smell of roasted goat and wood smoke clung to the air. "My friends," the priest began, voice steady, "today we gather to celebrate our community, to share food, stories, blessings. But this year I must ask you to hear something more, something heavier." A murmur swept through the gathered bodies. Don Mateo stood near the fountain, flanked by 2 of his men in polished boots. His smile was tight, eyes calculating. Alonso raised a bundle of papers, yellowed, but intact. "These are records, letters, land deeds, documents signed by your officials and by your neighbors. They tell a story of stolen land, of lies written in ink and enforced by fear." Someone in the crowd gasped. Mateo's hand twitched at his side. "Enough," he barked. "This is a festival, not a court." Alonso didn't stop. "They tell how Don Mateo Herrera, trusted rancher, benefactor, self-proclaimed protector of this town, has used his position to steal from those without power, especially from one woman who should have been his sister in blood, but was treated instead like an enemy." He turned to Rosa. "She has stayed silent long enough." The priest handed the documents to a man in the crowd, wearing a black coat and round spectacles, a federal investigator sent from Tucson, his presence arranged quietly the week before. The man read quickly, his brow furrowing. Mateo's voice rose. "This is slander," he shouted. "She's a half-breed. Her mother was Yaqui. She doesn't have the right to even stand here." People in the crowd shifted. Eyes turned toward Rosa, toward Eli, toward Tomasa, but no one moved. No one left. The investigator raised his hand. "These letters reference payments to judges, falsified land records, and threats made against multiple families. Witnesses have come forward. This is enough for an official inquiry." Mateo stepped forward, hand dropping to his hip. Caden was already moving. Before Mateo's fingers closed around the grip of his pistol, Caden pushed through the crowd. His boots hit the steps just as Mateo's gun cleared leather. The sound of Caden's rifle cocking cracked through the plaza like thunder. "Don't," Caden said, his voice calm. Mateo froze. The barrel of Caden's Winchester rested against Mateo's chest, steady despite the wound still throbbing in Caden's arm. "If you pull that trigger," Caden said, "you won't even get the first syllable out before you're on the ground." Mateo's eyes flickered, darting to the men behind him. But no one moved. His men looked to the crowd and saw no allies. They stepped back. Slowly, Mateo raised his hands. The federal officer nodded to the sheriff, who had been lingering like smoke around the edge of the plaza. The sheriff stepped forward, slapped irons on Mateo's wrists, and read the charges loud enough for everyone to hear. Fraud, conspiracy, theft of government land, threats of violence, attempted arson. Silence held the plaza for a full 5 seconds. Then, slowly, someone clapped. Another followed, and then more, until it wasn't silence anymore. It was sound, relief, vindication. No one wept, but many blinked hard. Mateo was dragged off through the crowd, no one reaching for him, no one offering protection. Rosa stood still, her back straight, her chin high. Eli ran up to her, hugged her waist. She bent down and held him close. Caden stepped off the steps and walked to them, the rifle slung again across his back. His face was unreadable, but the way Rosa looked at him told enough. Tomasa joined them, standing quietly beside the boy. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. When the sun began to dip behind the hills and the crowd started to disperse, Eli leaned close to his mother and whispered, without taking his eyes off the man who had saved them, "Is he staying?" Rosa didn't answer right away. She just looked at Caden, and wondered if a man who'd lost everything might finally be ready to belong somewhere again. The rains had passed. The land around San Gerardo exhaled steam in the mornings, soft fog curling over the low hills and soaking the half-mended fence lines. Caden stood barefoot on the cabin's roof just after sunrise, hammer in hand, shirtless despite the chill. His arm still bore the deep scar where the bullet had torn through, but he swung with measured strength, driving nails into cedar shakes with a rhythm that sounded like healing. Below him, Eli chased a chicken that had wandered too close to the vegetable patch. The boy tripped and rolled in the dirt, laughing so hard he forgot the bruises that used to stay on his ribs. Rosa stepped onto the porch carrying 2 tin mugs of coffee. She didn't call out, just waited. Caden glanced down, saw her holding the second mug, and that was all the invitation he needed. She handed him the coffee as he dropped from the roof with the slow caution of a man whose body still remembered pain. Their fingers brushed. He didn't let go immediately. They drank in silence for a long while. She broke it. "You know," Rosa said, "that roof's holding better than it ever did." Caden shrugged. "Built it to outlast gunfire. Rain shouldn't be much trouble." Eli came running, holding a feather like it was treasure. "Look what I found." Caden knelt, wiping the boy's cheek with a thumb. "From the Red Hen?" No, from the hawk nest up by the ridge. I climbed halfway up. Caden raised an eyebrow. You go climbing that ridge, you take someone with you. And no higher than your mama's shoulders, you hear? Eli grinned. Yes, sir. The days followed like water smoothing a stone. Caden built a small stable with Eli, guiding his hands on the hammer, teaching him how to choose straight boards from a pile. They tracked deer prints near the arroyo and set traps for rabbits. Eli shot his first quail with Caden's old pistol, and Rosa cooked it with wild garlic, all three of them sitting cross-legged on the floor like they'd been doing it for years. Every morning, Rosa poured 2 mugs of coffee, and every morning she waited for Caden to step through that door and sit across from her on the porch. She stopped asking when he would leave. One evening, just before dusk, Caden was fixing the latch on the garden gate when Rosa walked over, wiping her hands on her apron. I was thinking, she said, not looking directly at him. I've got some seeds left from my mother's garden. Corn, squash, a few of those flowers with petals like fire. He nodded. Sounds good. She bit her lip. I was thinking we could plant them. Together, Caden paused. I'd like that. She smiled, then stepped closer. Her voice dropped. Also been thinking. This house might feel more like home if it had 2 names on the deed. He looked at her, long and quiet. Then, slowly, he nodded again. If we're carving initials, better save a spot for Eli, too. Rosa's breath caught. Then she reached for his hand, held it without speaking. Word traveled fast. By week's end, Tomasa had arranged for a ceremony, one that pulled from every root their family held. Apache, Yaqui, and Catholic. It took place under the cottonwoods by the river, their branches braided with strips of colored cloth and feathers. Father Alonzo stood beside an elder woman in beadwork who sprinkled cedar ash in a circle, blessing the union. A young Yaqui boy drummed softly as Rosa stepped forward barefoot, a white shawl wrapped around her shoulders. Eli stood between them, holding 2 strands of braided horsehair. When the vows were spoken, they didn't raise their voices. They didn't need to. Everyone there knew what had already been spoken without words, for weeks. Caden didn't say love. He said, I will not leave. Rosa didn't say forever. She said, You are home. The elder nodded. Father Alonzo lifted his hands in blessing, and Eli tied the braid between them, grinning so wide his cheeks hurt. The village women wept softly. Afterward, they shared stew and music around a fire. Caden danced with Rosa once awkwardly, his boots clumsy in the soft dirt, but she laughed and didn't let go. That night, after Eli had fallen asleep beneath a quilt, stitched with every color Rosa had left, Caden sat beside her on the porch, their chairs touching. She turned to him, eyes shimmering in the moonlight. I never thought I'd be safe enough to dream. And for once, Caden didn't speak. He just reached for her hand and held it until dawn. Don Mateo died in jail 2 weeks before the trial could begin. No visitors, no warning. Just a pale body and a quiet note signed by the sheriff's office that read, Ruptured artery. Rosa read it in silence, then folded the paper once and handed it back. She didn't shed a tear. Neither did Caden. But death didn't end the war. Mateo's nephew, Rafael Cortez, a sharp-jawed man in a silver suit who'd never worked a day of soil in his life, filed suit against Rosa the next morning. Claimed the deed was forged, claimed she had no right to the land, claimed the marriage was convenient. They sent men with papers, lawyers from Tucson, threats written in Latin. The sheriff of San Gerardo couldn't help. This was headed for the regional court in Santa Cruz County, a full trial. So they went, the whole family. Caden wore his cleanest coat, the one with the blood stain at the sleeve hidden beneath a patch. Rosa braided her hair tight like she had before everything fell apart. And Eli walked taller than both of them now, broad shoulders, a jaw like flint, and the kind of stillness he'd learned from Caden. The courtroom smelled of old wood and heat. Rows of townsfolk packed the benches behind them. Father Alonzo came, Tomasa too, in a new blue shawl. Even Sheriff Ortez made the ride north, quietly sitting in the back row. The trial dragged for 5 days. Raphael's lawyer spoke of lineage, of legacy, of preserved Spanish grants. They questioned Rosa's literacy, hinted at Caden's violent past, and implied Eli was too young to understand any of it. But on the last day, when the judge asked if anyone else would like to speak, Eli stood up. He walked to the front, boots echoing on the floor like gunshots. "My name is Eli Devereaux," he said, voice steady. "I was 7 years old when Don Mateo beat my mother and told me we were nothing. I saw this land built back from ashes, watched it be planted and harvested and healed. I helped rebuild the roof over our heads with my own hands. That land's not in some name scratched in a book. It's in calloused palms, in broken bones mended, in coffee poured every morning." He paused. "This trial ain't about paper. It's about whether truth has a voice loud enough to rise above men with money." The room held its breath. Even Raphael looked away. By noon, the jury returned. Unanimous. Rosa Devereaux was the legal and rightful owner of the land. The claims were dismissed with prejudice, and a formal investigation into property fraud by the Cortez family was opened before sundown. Outside, the townsfolk broke into cheers. Eli hugged his mother so tightly her hat nearly flew off. Caden just stood nearby, watching her smile, that rare kind of proud where no words are needed. That night they ate dinner under the stars. No speeches, just tamales, laughter, and the wind brushing through the mesquite. Eli leaned back, eyes on the black sky. "Now we build for others too." 10 years passed like river water, slow and steady, but always moving. The land held. The house stood strong, its porch posts carved with patterns Caden had once seen in Apache beadwork. Wind still sang through the cottonwoods. The barn smelled of hay and sun. But the biggest change sat right next door. A one-room schoolhouse with wide windows and a bell that rang every morning at 8. It was Eli's doing, not just the bricks and timber, but the heart of it. He taught history, math, and ethics. He taught with his hands as much as his voice. Some days he'd read to the youngest under the big oak tree. Some days he'd walk the older kids through irrigation systems or carpentry. And some days he'd simply let them speak. Let them name the weight they carried. The name carved above the door read, "The Devereaux School for Justice and Learning." People rode from counties away to sit in on lessons or ask advice. Mothers sent their children in wagons before sunrise, and when newspapers wrote stories about a new kind of schoolhouse rising in the West, Eli just smiled and poured another cup of strong coffee. Across the yard, Rosa kept the homestead running like a quiet engine. She still rose before the sun, still planted herbs in the windowsill. But now she hosted gatherings every month, forums, dinners, healing circles. Women came to her bruised and left with plans. Men came angry and left quieter, humbled. She sat with outlaws and schoolmarms alike, and no one left her presence unchanged. And Caden? He fixed fences, helped birth calves, built benches for the chapel. His shoulders had stooped a little, and he moved slower now, but his voice had only grown firmer. He spoke rarely, but when he did, people listened. He was the man who once saved a boy in the rain, who stood still in a square while justice caught up to a tyrant. To the children of San Gerardo, he was known simply as the man who made it safe. One golden evening, with the cicadas buzzing and shadows stretching long across the pasture, Caden sat on the front steps, polishing an old rifle that no longer saw use. A soft thud of footsteps came behind him. It was Isabella Eli's daughter, 8 years old, fierce like her grandmother, clever like her father. She plopped down beside him, legs swinging. "Grandpa," she said, head tilted, "tell me how you met Grandma." Caden set the rifle down slowly. He glanced toward the window where Rosa stood in the kitchen, her gray streaks tucked under a scarf, humming softly as she chopped onions. "How I met your grandma," he murmured, rubbing his jaw. "That's a long story." "I like long stories," Isabella grinned. He smiled. Not a big smile, but one of those deep, private ones that warms the ribs. "Well," he began, "a long time ago I was just a man passing through. And I stopped in a town where something smelled like trouble. Were there bad guys?" "Oh, more than a few," he said. "But before any of that, a little boy with hungry eyes stepped out of a doorway and looked up at me," he said. Caden paused, the memory falling over him like morning fog. He said, "Mister, do you shoot for money? Or to protect someone?" Isabella's eyes went wide. "What did you say?" I told him I wasn't sure. "But that day? I figured it out. And Grandma? She made sure I never forgot it." They sat there in silence a while, watching the sunset bleed across the hills. The schoolhouse bell rang in the distance, even though it was past hours. Probably Eli fixing something inside. Rosa stepped onto the porch with 2 glasses of lemonade and handed one to Caden without a word. "Grandpa," Isabella asked again, softer now, "are bad men still out there?" He nodded slowly, eyes scanning the horizon. "Bad men are still out there, Isabella. But now, they don't stand a chance." And with that, the evening closed in like a warm quilt. Quiet, golden, full of stories still waiting to be told, because the West never stops writing itself. And some legacies are born from blood, but the best ones are built like fences, like families, like futures. If you've walked with us this far, friend, then saddle up for what's coming next. More tales of grit and grace, of cowboys and courage, of families made not born. Subscribe now to Western Legacy and never miss the stories carved in dust and remembered in heart.